You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to episode 53 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. With me, to my left, is Jessica Salaji.
Is that philosophically?
It is. No, you know what? I'm probably the furthest left-leaning person in the podcast.
Depends on the day and the subject.
That's true. That's true. Matt Lowe couldn't be here because he's off selling bitches. As anybody who's listened to the podcast knows, he's had several puppies around the house that they've bred. So he's off taking a couple of them. And when I found out how much those things sold for, I'm like, go.
Well, not only that, but we've been listening to those puppies yap in the background. So, yes, please shut them up.
Those beautiful babies. Shut them up. Jessica, how was your week?
It's been legislatively busy, but it's been good. What about you?
It's been good. You know, when I focus on like life, everything's wonderful.
Right.
I was in a governmental affairs meeting, and it was time for essentially closing thoughts. They came to me, and they'd all been talking about political awareness and how to get people aware of the issues. And I said, awareness is not happiness.
That is true.
You'll be much happier not knowing what they're doing down there.
Ignorance is bliss. It's hell for everyone else, but it's bliss for you.
Oh, absolutely. I never believed it because I've always been had an insatiable appetite for information and facts and what's going on. You know what? If you just pay attention to spring training, enjoy your bread and circuses, life is wonderful.
I always, obviously doing this as my full-time job, I really struggle with what is the right balance of like politics and, like you try to separate your social life from your work life. But and I feel like it's so much easier to do, even during election season and campaigning and everything, and everything that's going on. It is so much easier to do that than during the legislative session because, like, even my social media is just so full of people who I'm thankful for that have, passions and therefore issues. But it's like, even when you're trying to wind down and you're just trying to see, like, whose dog's birthday it is today, you're seeing, please contact these senators for this bill. And you just want to be like, no, that's a terrible bill. They're all terrible bills. Please stop. Please stop. There's no more just kittens and dogs. Not during session.
And not being a millennial, I will say, I like most people I meet. I do. Even those lawmakers and I have found myself in a position where I don't interact with them as much as you do, but where I have local and state lawmakers come and talk, we talk, and even folks I oppose, and we've talked about this when you interviewed Stacey Abrams, and you asked me if she came off as the devil. I'm like, no. On several things, I think she's wrong, but she's not the devil. I like most people individually. It's not until we all get into our trenches that we dislike each other. Because I guarantee you, Bill Clinton and I could grab a beer together, especially 30 years ago, when, there'd be chicks around and stuff.
Of course. No, I mean, and I think that's another reason that I'm kind of in a little bit different situation is because, like, with what I do locally, the ones I interact with are never happy to see me. Like, when you're exposing corruption, no one wants to see you. And when you show up, they know that they've done something or they're about to be caught. With the legislature, yes, I'm constantly criticizing their bills because I'm so staunchly opposed to, like, any expansion of government, no matter who it's for. But it's not personal for me. Like, there's only one or two lawmakers who I think are just absolute idiots, who I would just tell to their face, like, you've got it all wrong. But I know for the most part that even when I disagree with these people, like, the majority of them aren't bad people. They're good people. They're just doing terrible things in the legislature. But they don't go home and continue being terrible. So I think that's a good preface for especially the topics we have for this week.
It is. Well, President Trump wants to use asset forfeiture to fund his border wall.
So I feel like it's worth noting that we compiled our ideas and talked about what we wanted to talk about this week. And then SCOTUS came down with their ruling. So that's kind of going to be like well, this is what he wants to do, but we don't know how this will yet impact it on all of these topics that we're going to talk about with asset forfeiture here. But specifically with his wall, he wants to take $600 million from the Treasury Department's asset forfeiture fund, which obviously is not near what he needs, but it's still a lot of money. And it's all from like the IRS and Customs and Border Protection and ICE. And it would be $600 million of the $2.2 billion that they had in 2017, like just sitting there. And there's an article on Reason that was talking about all this and how it comes from criminal and civil forfeiture stuff. But the government entities, none of them keep track of who was actually convicted and who was just suspected or party to or anything like that. So technically, for all intents and purposes, he wants to use money that cannot be connected to a conviction.
And I would call that willful ignorance.
Absolutely.
Now let's differentiate here, and we'll talk about the ruling in a minute. But that was kind of a different thing. With what the feds have, if you go to your bank and you drop in $10,000 and a penny in cash, they do what's called a currency transaction report, or if you do what they call I can't remember the technical term for it, but if you go in and you deposit 9,000 3 times, knowing it's below the limit, they will do what's called a suspicious activity report, and that goes to the feds, and they can decide there's no legal way that a redneck from Paulding County could deposit $30,000 in cash unless he got that money illegally or didn't pay taxes on it. So they can go and seize it and make me prove to them that, I sold a piece of equipment, I sold my truck, whatever it is, to get my own money back. These were laws that were written to, not that they were correct, but written to take money away from the mob.
Right. Well, and I think that there's also a distinction between, which we're going to kind of dive into, but specifically here when you're talking about money collected from IRS, either on a criminal side or a civil side for penalties, versus the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and ICE. Like, there was a story that came out not too long ago where I don't even think it was a story, it was a press release that I happened to stumble upon, but Customs and Border Protection, they were praising agents for stopping a woman who was driving from Texas across the border, and she had a large amount of cash in her vehicle, no drugs or anything, and they took the money. And I'm like, just because they said that she shouldn't have been traveling with that amount of cash, she probably was doing something that I wouldn't do, unless she was just planning on upping and moving. But the press release didn't indicate that she had, was moving or was going to set up shop over there or anything like that. Whatever her reasoning was, they stopped the car, did like a radar infrared type inspection, and then found a reason to searched the vehicle physically and ended up finding cash and seized it and arrested her.
Well, and they have cash sniffing dogs.
Which is wild.
Yeah, we're going to train a police dog to detect something perfectly legal.
Right. That you probably earned or was legally given to you. I mean, we're not talking about bank robbers. Like, this woman hadn't committed a crime. She was not fleeing a crime. And they took the money. And the process to get the money back at the state, local, or federal level is just almost insurmountable. It's expensive.
Right. And that is how they end up with it is. Now, we need to preface large amount of money. My definition of a large amount of money and somebody else's are two very different things. So, to somebody, $5,000 in cash may be a lot. Like, why would you ever want to walk around with $5,000 in cash? I flew out of a job that was a heavily cash job with a good amount of cash on me. We had just done a tear out on a grocery store, and they had to have an air conditioning company do it because it had refrigerant. So the compensation was selling the scrap that we're taking out of it. At the time, copper was really expensive, so we did very well on that side of it. And at some point, the scrapyard ran out of hundreds and paid us in 20s, so it made it even look worse. Mm-hmm. So I flew out of South Florida with a bundle of cash. There's two of us. Each of us had a bundle of cash and a pistol, because you can fly with weapons. So I checked that, and it didn't occur to me until I was going through TSA when I refused to put the cash on the belt, because I've lost a laptop before going through TSA. I wasn't going to do that. And I think I was pretty demeaning to the poor TSA agents when I said, I'm not going to put more than you make in 6 months on the belt. And of course, this wasn't all profit. It had to go to job expenses and everything else, but we were coming home with it. And they lost their minds when they saw this bundle of cash come out of my pocket. And they said, how much is that? And I'm, not that dumb. I said, $9,000. And they go, we have to count it. If it's over 10, we have to count it. I said, it's 9,000, trust me. And they asked, my brother was behind me. We were in business together at the time. And they said, where did he get that money? He said, he hit a jackpot at the casino. They said, oh, okay. As long as I hadn't earned it, it was fine.
Oh my gosh. That's the most asinine thing I think I've heard out of the TSA.
As soon as they thought I won the money, I guess for one thing, if you walk out of a casino with a large amount of cash, if that gets reported to the IRS. But the fact is, if that report had gone up and they decided that there's no way that this guy could have gotten that money legally, especially coming out of South Florida, which is known as a hotbed for drugs, they could have just seized it, just taken it.
I thought though that the 10,000 was for international travel. I didn't know that was just domestically.
They want to count it, and they want to mark it up. And trust me, lots of people fly through international airports with more than 10,000 in cash and don't report it. The common way for a while, recently for a while, was in Bitcoin. You put it in blockchain and just carry your fob in your pocket and cross through. That is a law that was passed, again, like the Patriot Act, in a crisis. The drug cartels were making a lot of money. Miami is built on cocaine. And they wanted a way of crushing the cartels. So that's the way they clamped down on it, was anti-money laundering laws. like every other law, has been perverted to benefit the government.
Well, and we really drifted.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, I have too, because I was just about to, before we get back to Trump using the money for the wall, I mean, we were really talking about, because you brought up that you didn't want to put the money on the belt. Well, it's not just at the airport. I mean, especially when you're talking about cash, you're not talking, it's different when you're talking about assets, like a vehicle is seized or your guns or something, or even drugs. But when you're talking about cash being seized, I mean, it's story after story of, well, I had more than that. And then, well, we only counted this much, And so between the confusion over amounts or the, dare I say, theft of some of the money or assets, and then the cost to get it back and the time to get it back, I mean, it is truly a form of robbery.
Oh, sure. And structuring is the word I was searching for earlier, when you put in smaller amounts. And there's a case of a farmer who sold his crops, and he was structuring his deposits because someone told him that it was just easier to do that so the poor teller doesn't have to fill out the paperwork. So they got up for structuring. The IRS went and seized it, and he had to prove to get his own money back. And this wasn't a rich man. This is somebody who sells his crops once a year, and that's what he lives off of.
It's one of the most infuriating things. Like, I mean, the topic itself is enraging, and it can get your blood pressure up. But when you read some of these stories of instances where this has happened to people and hearing like what they actually went through for their own belongings and how it was taken and how they weren't parties to a crime or oftentimes even suspected of like anything legitimate. Like, I don't understand how anyone other than those who directly benefit could support it. I don't understand how this was an issue. I don't understand why the states have not reformed this on their own. I don't understand why there's not a federal guideline. It's beyond me. And I've been a critic of Trump, but for the most part, there's plenty of things that he's done that I support. This is not one of them. I don't want to see this money used to build the wall. Like, if you want to build the wall, fine. Find the money somewhere else. Don't use this practice to fund something that is supposed to be legitimate.
No, look, if we're talking about convicted and we're taking those funds, use it for whatever you want. El Chapo was convicted. If they take the money they seized from him and use it for whatever, as long as it's, we're going to get to the Supreme Court ruling here in a minute, that's fine. But kind of what we were talking about at the opening of this is folks are, by legal standards, not guilty, innocent, unless proven guilty. And
another problem I have with this, which is just being super nitpicky, but consistent with what I deal with at the state and local levels, the Treasury Department has shielded the public from their forfeiture databases for years and years and years. There's Freedom of Information Act lawsuits against them from different organizations because they block the records about if the money's related to a conviction, where it's coming from, how, like, if there's certain agencies that are responsible for the majority of the income or revenue or however you want to explain it, they don't want to release it. They give the bare minimum, and then information that should otherwise be open for public review and scrutiny is not. And so I think that's another reason. Like, it's basically dark money. Don't use dark money to provide a promise that is one of your most important promises that you made.
Yeah, and look, Trump should probably get his wall. And not for any other reason than that's the cornerstone of why he was elected. Mm-hmm. Probably should have done the Obama thing, is come in his first 2 years and push it and get it done before his legislature flipped. Because it happens to almost every president.
Right.
So that's a procedural foul on his part and on the part of the Republicans. But yeah, he should probably get his wall. Whether you, idealistically, I believe that we could handle most illegal immigration by getting rid of the handouts in our country.
Absolutely.
But that notwithstanding,
I mean, they're not even landowners. I'll go ahead and say that on Matt's behalf. Like, these people coming here aren't landowners. They shouldn't get anything, right?
Well, exactly. They certainly shouldn't have a voice.
You're welcome, Matt.
He's not listening. But that notwithstanding is Congress has the purse strings. It's Article 1 of the Constitution. Do things the right way. And we're getting off on a tangent on that. But when you're talking about the feds, you're also getting the guy who had $6,000 he mailed in money orders seized by the feds.
When I just was talking about like these stories that make your blood boil to the point where you just want to call someone and curse them out, this is one of them.
Yeah, he was helping out a friend
who was in financial distress.
Right. Hey man, can I borrow $6,000? Which, I need some better friends.
Right.
Sure. You want me to wire it to you? Can you send me money orders? Here, no problem. Here you go. It is amazing to me because, again, 6,000 is a lot and a little.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wouldn't go out and set fire to $6,000.
Right.
But it's not so much that I assume anybody with $6,000 in cash has, ill-gotten gains.
Well, and this story is particularly disturbing because what the narrative that law enforcement used to try to officially, because they seized the money orders and then they had to officially have it transferred to them in a court. And, it was FedExed and he used a credit card to pay for it. Like, it wasn't like some random address with or random envelope with no return address paid for in cash. There was a paper trail tying it directly to him. And they claimed that there was a coffee bag and it was vacuum sealed and all this stuff. None of that is true. And you can see the stuff that was seized in this article that was on Greenville Online, which we'll post. But they were just randomly inspecting the envelopes.
The best part of the story as I scroll through it?
What's that?
The random ad that comes up in the middle of the story is for the USPS. And he was said because he was sending U.S. Postal Service money orders.
I mean, should they really be advertising? They're so broke.
Yeah, very, very true.
But
the algorithm didn't break down the fact that maybe it did. It's a bad story for FedEx, so advertise the post office.
That's awesome. But I mean, in all seriousness, like, I don't think most people think that when they take something to UPS or FedEx or even the post office that it's truly going to be subjected to. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to mail 2 pounds of weed, someone's probably going to smell it. But when you drop a piece of paper in the mail or a money order or even a small bit of cash or a check or whatever, I don't think anyone thinks, oh, this could be seized. Other than it might be stolen, but not seized.
Right.
I mean, has that ever crossed your mind when you've mailed something?
Oh, wow. depends on what I'm mailing. It is
you
true.
You get what I'm getting at. Though.
Yes, it is true that there are literally tons of guns and drugs that are delivered through FedEx, UPS, USPS, and there are. I mean, that's part of the way that our Georgia families get the medication they need from out of the state because we can't cultivate our own marijuana, is through those delivery services. Man, but yeah, especially you're helping a buddy out that is passed to you on a cell phone, needs a place to stay, so you fire off what is not an insurmountable amount of money to them. And like you highlighted, paid with a credit card. There was no cash involved.
Well, and it's like you brought up earlier. It becomes, the burden is on you to prove that you didn't do anything wrong.
Which is not how the founding fathers envisioned our justice system.
Or our mail system, or our highway safety system. I mean, the whole thing just stinks to high heaven, and it's better than it was. I think there was a story that came out in 2013 that really highlighted the abuses, and it kind of steamrolled the movement of raising awareness. Because, I mean, I didn't know what this was until a few years ago. I was not familiar with the practice. If you hadn't been subjected to it, why would you know about it? And I haven't been subjected to it, but there have been so many movements and organizations that have jumped on the bandwagon to try to ban the practice altogether. In Georgia, I remember, I think it was 2015, they passed a bill that basically brought all of the local governments in line with each other and with the state agencies. And it brought it gave some of them more power, and it gave a lot of them less power. And the argument was, well, we'll give a few people more power under civil asset forfeiture laws, but a lot of them will be reined in. Instead of just eliminating the practice altogether and saying, oh no, Georgia stands for due process and, innocent unless proven otherwise, they just decided to tweak the law to make sure that everyone's rights are violated equally across the state. That was Georgia's solution.
Why do you hate cops? And when this question comes up, that's the fallback position for the lawmakers is many departments fund themselves with this money. Well, you can't use that logic with any other sector of life. Yeah, of course I stole that money. It's how I feed my kids.
I thought it was wasn't it South Carolina where there was a police department or was it the state of South Carolina? I don't remember, but $17 million in a single year that they used in asset funds to fund their. Do you know what I'm talking about? Was it the entire state or was it a single entity?
Well, police seized over $17.6 million from 3,200 residents in just over 3 years.
Okay, so I had a couple of those facts wrong, but regardless, you're talking about running their departments and everything off of it. I think South Carolina is one of the worst offenders because they're also the state that budgeted the lottery ticket winnings from the income taxes in their fiscal year budget, and then nobody collected the winning ticket money. So they had to readjust their budget by like millions of dollars so South Carolina has a history of spending money they don't have. But that's literally what you're doing when you take, asset forfeiture, at a minimum, it should be placed in an account that cannot be touched on the condition that it could be given back. And it should be given back. But if you're going to take it, don't spend it.
Right. I don't even have a good response. It started off years and years ago, and there was actually a TV show in the 80s called Bad Boys, where they used all the seized stuff to catch other bad guys, other people selling drugs. And you don't feel sorry when you see somebody who's, some sort of kingpin and they lose their Ferrari. But when you find out that this practice is applied across the board and it's used as a line item in their budget, knowing, hey, on average, we collect this much from bad guys and we can fund this program and this program with it. And it's not okay. Yeah, it's not a tax. It's not a punishment, particularly in cases where it's just seized. There's no conviction to go with it.
Right.
That, by the way, that bill in South Carolina, 80 reps co-sponsored the bill.
I think that they were embarrassed after that because it was national news about how much they'd collected. I hope they were embarrassed.
Well, Michigan's another state that plans to end asset forfeiture of people who have not been convicted of crimes.
Well, Scott Turner drops the bill here in Georgia every year, but he doesn't have any clout, so the bill never goes anywhere.
Which for most of his bills is a good thing.
Right. Broken clock is right twice a day.
But no, the states should be doing that. Only 11 states at this point require a conviction for forfeiture. Now, let's talk a little bit about what happened last Wednesday morning with the Supreme Court ruling on forfeiture practices. In this particular case, it's a woman, right?
Was it?
A person gets stopped.
I thought it was Tyson Timms.
And maybe. I may have been reading another story, which this is awesome radio. Me trying to remember one story from another. Gets popped with a minimal amount of weed. And something that 90% of the police departments out there would throw on the ground and stomp on. And tell you to go away.
Wait, are you talking about the Supreme Court ruling from Wednesday?
Yes.
It was heroin.
It was a little heroin?
Yeah.
Sorry, Giles had me going with a different one. Somebody got popped with like a roach.
I mean, I'm not trying to correct you, but my story says heroin.
No, please do correct me. If you don't, who will? So anyway, small amount of drugs. The person bought this vehicle with money received from an insurance settlement. I'm right on that one, right? It was.
I have father died, but it's okay.
Well, yeah, but it was life insurance.
This is hilarious, by the way.
Yeah, this is awesome. So, the vehicle is not related to the drugs. Now, the person gets sentenced for the crime of having an illegal substance, but the vehicle is still taken as a civil asset forfeiture. And the Supreme Court today struck that down under the 8th and 14th Amendments. The 8th... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for numbers, for what you're about to talk about, for numbers' sake, I think they said he had $400 worth of heroin, which equated to a maximum fine of $10,000 for what he was, because there was like trafficking and all of those things because he was en route somewhere. But still, $10,000 was the maximum fine, even if that seems a little high. And the car was valued at $40,000. So keep those two numbers in mind as Dave explains.
Now, keep in mind, this ruling was unanimous.
Woo.
Which means the second time since I've been doing this show, I agree with Ginsburg. The first being when she didn't like the treatment of Kavanaugh. The 8th Amendment prohibiting excessive fines or punishment. And the 14th applying the constitutional rights to the states. It is a very rare time that everyone on the Supreme Court, whether you were nominated by an R or a D, looked at this case and said, you can't do that. To the point where one of the justices had the lawyer for the state going in circles saying that they would confiscate a vehicle, I can't remember what the number was, for $10 in marijuana. Something crazy like that. And he couldn't defend himself on that.
Well, it's just hard to comprehend that anyone would think taking a vehicle was justifiable for any amount of drugs. I mean, the fine, unless you're like a cartel member, it's hard to comprehend how someone would think that was okay. Right.
I don't like it anyway, But if they were using the vehicle in the commission of the crimes, if this was a tool of committing the crime, you take the tool away from the criminal. I still don't really like it, because you're sentenced individually. Your sentence is what it is. If it's 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine or $100,000 fine, that's what it is. And at that point, if they have to take assets to satisfy the fine, that is what it is. But you're right. You can't. If the law says the maximum is $10,000, you certainly can't take a $40,000 vehicle.
No, and this is, like you said, just a minor example of what's actually been occurring. I mean, there's been instances where there's been accusations and charges and no conviction, and the assets are not only frozen but seized, and someone's house is taken, and let's just say it's, the man in the household who is the one that's at the center of everything. Well, now the wife and children don't have a place to live, they don't have vehicles to drive, and they don't have any money. Like, those are the types of things that are happening. This is not an isolated incident. And it's not just this incident that, 4 times the maximum fine. Like, it's routine.
And that is the God's honest truth, is what should be rare, well, shouldn't be at all, but what was intended to be rare and targeted at the worst in society is applied to those who have the least to defend themselves. And
it's the epitome of why we have the laws or the Constitution and the laws in place that we do to restrict government, because if you give an inch, they take a mile. It doesn't matter what it's about. And this is the prime example.
And the Founding Fathers would have been appalled at the idea that a courier would be stopped. A constable would rifle through the letters in his satchel, take out his knife, break the wax seal, and look through letters to see if any currency is being transferred. Is there anyone that thinks that was the intent of any of the laws that our framers gave us?
No. I'm the only one here, but no.
I'm the only one here. No, I mean, it was rhetorical. Sorry, I didn't study rhetoricals. Because silence is awesome.
Yeah.
But it does seem like it's getting worse in the as time goes on. But then again, so does everything.
Sure, because you do it and you collect a gun that was in the car and you keep it and you seize it and you sell it and you keep the money, not personally but as an agency, and so you're emboldened, and the next time you get a little bit more and you take the stereo equipment from a car and you sell the rims, and then the next time you're even more emboldened and you go a little bit further, and but before you know it, you rule the roost and what you say goes and everything is automatically yours. I mean, no, that is not every agency's mentality, but there are agencies that thrive on the idea of it.
There are local departments that make their nut off of it. They're so poorly funded with everything else that the only way that they can survive as a department is to keep this up. And that goes to the addiction that government has to money. Government inherently is broke. The only way they can generate funds is to steal it from the people. And this just happens to be a much more bald-faced theft than we typically see with taxes.
So what do you think happens as a result of the Supreme Court ruling? What do you think happens now at the state level?
This ruling is fairly narrow, in my opinion. Of course, I went to air conditioning medical school, not law school. And it specifically applies to excess fines.
Right.
So
it doesn't outlaw the practice.
Right. So it doesn't outlaw civil forfeitures at all.
Right.
It actually incentivizes states not to prosecute. Because if you prosecute, there's a set penalty that goes along with that. But if you don't, you can hold it forever. Now, I don't know if that will actually happen, but I think the application of this is fairly narrow. What needs to happen is there needs to be a Fourth Amendment argument against civil forfeiture. And that is the seizing of property without due process.
Well, this is uplifting.
It is, but it's a step in the right direction. And the Supreme Court can only rule on the arguments that are brought before them. And the argument on this one was on the 8th and 14th Amendments. And so those rulings will be applied using those. So if you get caught with a roach under your seat, they can't take your Lexus.
Right. Which is, I mean, it's still a victory nevertheless. Like, there are a lot of things that are going to be stopped because of this. So it's not to say that just because there's a downside to it doesn't mean that it's great. It's just, we got a long way to go.
We do, but I think the court did absolutely the right thing.
I agree.
This is a good time to remind everybody that these are our opinions and not necessarily those of All on Georgia. And if you like what you hear, go ahead and go to your favorite podcast platform and give us the max stars. If it's 4 max, give us 4. If it's 5, give us 5. Give us all the stars. If you don't like what we do here, lie.
Mm-mm.
Just go ahead and give us the 5 stars. I mean, it doesn't cost you anything. Last week, Georgia Supreme Court handed down a ruling refusing to submit to DUI breath test can't be used against you at trial.
This is so beautiful. This is such a long time coming. I'm so excited.
Or, as Georgia Poll put it, Georgia Supreme Court creates dangerous bypass for drunk drivers.
I was really disappointed by that headline because that's not what it's about. You can still, basically, it just says that if you refuse a breathalyzer, that your guilt should not be presumed, and refusing to incriminate yourself, which is what you do when you blow in a breathalyzer, whether you've been drinking or not, you're putting yourself on the line to incriminate yourself. But if you refuse to do that, it can't be used against you in court. With every other offense and crime and ordinance and everything else, we give people the opportunity to refuse to incriminate themselves, except with drunk driving or the suspicion of drunk driving. And you can, under this, this ruling, you can still be arrested. They can still get a warrant for your blood. They can still arrest you for failing field sobriety tests or having indicators of impairment. I mean, this does not keep the police from doing their job. It just makes them do their job a little bit better if you are actually impaired, and then gives you an opportunity to have a fair shot in court.
Right. Absolutely. And of course, who hates this is MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
If they had their way, they'd have everyone blow in a breathalyzer before they turn the ignition.
I don't think so. Here's the thing. That would end all drunk driving. And that would take away any power they have politically. So they don't want to actually solve the problem. They just want you to perceive this huge problem. They attribute 10,876 deaths nationally to intoxicated drivers. Georgia Department of Highway Safety reported there are 368 in our state every year. Now,
which isn't even that much. I mean, we had like 1,300 people die on our roads that last year. So, I mean, yeah, it's a lot of people and it's sad and it's wrong and it's illegal and all those things. But it's not like it's just people can't get to work because they're getting blown off the road.
to pad their stats, they will put the presence of alcohol into those stats, whether the driver's impaired or not. And we've talked about this with several issues, is things get thrown in together for statistical purposes. So the guy that had a beer and had a BAC of, I don't know, 0.001, had alcohol in his blood, and they'll throw him in with the same stats as the guy that got blotto and tried driving home with a hand over one eye, so he didn't have double vision.
Right. Well, before I was in what I do now, whatever that is, I worked for a defense attorney in Marietta, and she primarily did DUI. She did some other stuff too, but she also taught a continuing education class and on case law that happened from the year before. And the things that happen on the roadside and the way that the courts flip-flop back and forth. I mean, DUI law changes on how it's enforced weekly. And this idea of implied consent, that you consent to this privilege on the road, and so therefore you agree to follow the rules and you give up certain rights, is asinine. And I can't believe they've gotten away with it for so long, and I can't believe it took this long for an attorney to challenge it in the courts. But I'm glad they did.
Or took this long for the Supreme Court to hear it.
Right.
I think you and I are see eye to eye on implied consent. This is not us endorsing driving under the influence. This is treating driving under the influence as any other crime. You don't get to forcibly remove somebody's DNA in a rape case. You don't, which is arguably a much bigger offense than driving after having a couple beers.
Where there's oftentimes not a victim.
Right.
Yet. I mean, I understand that it's a preventative don't get me wrong. Again, not defending it. But if you are just pulled over, you have not hurt anyone yet. And you are treating them less than a murderer.
Or worse, you're not pulled over for any driving infraction. You're stopped at a checkpoint, and then you were searched, and then forced to give witness against yourself. Now, there's no reason to do field sobriety tests. Don't do them. I can't do most of them sober, and there's just no reason to do it. All that is evidence for the prosecution. Not giving legal advice. I told you I went to air conditioning medical school, not law school. But the courts have long established that drivers aren't forced to perform like trick ponies at the circus on the side of the road. It's been long established that they're designed to be failed.
Well, and I think we may have glossed over it quickly, but like if you refuse the field sobriety tests, that you can refuse that. If you refuse a breathalyzer, you automatically lose your license right now.
Right.
And have to go have a court hearing at the administrative licensing hearing and have them hear why you should have your license on a conditional basis until you're convicted. Like, if you are convicted, oftentimes it's thrown out or reduced to reckless driving, in which you don't lose it. The system was designed to crack down on the worst of offenders. And what you have is people who refused because they were scared or because they had attorney friends who said never give the test or whatever. And they pay the consequences and end up forking out legal fees and all these other things because the court is already tipped against them by the time they get there. They've already lost their license. They've already been presumed to have done something wrong. And law enforcement gets up on the stand and says, well, they refused my test.
Right. And by and large, DUI is a poor man's crime. If you can afford the attorney, it is far easier for the state to take a plea and go to reckless driving or something like that. It is also a crime of the less educated. somebody who hasn't spoken with an attorney, who thinks that he's got an authority figure and he has to go walk this line, stand on one foot, touch your nose while doing the alphabet backwards. It's one of those crimes that costs you 10 grand either way.
Yep.
Either the states can get you 10 grand, you're going to go into private probation, Jessica. Mm-hmm. Have to go to a private DUI school, which I don't know what they teach in that school. Besides, hey, don't drive when you drink.
Don't drive drunk.
Yeah, I mean, and I have no idea what that class costs because I'm sure it's not cheap. There's a whole industry that's built around DUI. It's one of the reasons
Absolutely.
They hate Uber and Lyft so much. Is they don't actually want DUI crime to go down. And I say they, what I mean by they is, the X-Files, they, the deep state, whatever you want to call government, doesn't actually want the DUI offenses to go down.
Which is horrifying to think about in reality, but...
Well, that's where the super speeder came from.
Mm-hmm.
DUIs were down. That's why they want to increase fines on reckless driving.
Well, the opinion, most people didn't take the time to read it, understandably. It's 94 pages, but they do a good job of summarizing in the beginning, and the justices, in their opinion, pretty much just hammered the idea and have said that they've held this before and they're holding it again, that the protection against self-incrimination affords you the right to refuse. And it shouldn't be used against you. And the succinctly put, it said, we agree. And there was a case, I think, back in 2017 where they said the same thing, that unlike the Fifth Amendment, the Georgia Constitution's right against self-incrimination prevents the state from forcing someone to submit to a chemical breath test. You shouldn't be forced to do something to avoid other legal consequences. That does not happen with any other crime.
Right.
The case would be thrown out entirely if it were any other crime.
And of course, this applies to warrantless search. If you have probable cause, you get their blood. Just like if they have probable cause to go search your house. Your Honor, here's the evidence that we have. This is what we believe is probable cause. This person committed this crime. We need to go search their home. There you go. The judge either signs it or he doesn't. What we don't want are judges rubber stamping any search of blood. But same thing comes with DNA testing. Is they need to sign a warrant to collect your DNA, unless, of course, call back here, you've gone and gotten your 23andMe. But that is two positive court stories in a row, showing at least one branch of the government doing what it should be doing.
You're right, and it gives me a little bit of hope. And then I remember that it's like an abusive relationship where you're like, oh, it's going to be better, and then it's not.
Well, yeah, that's a really depressing way of putting that. What I was going to say, they'll piss us off next week.
But it's true. I mean, these are great things.
He hits me because he loves me.
You said you were different.
It's only when he drinks.
I mean, it's terrible, and I'm not mocking domestic violence, Lord. I am not. I'm just saying, this idea that, they do something good for a little while, or we get a good ruling, and we think things are going to shift, and everyone's focused on it, but they're still doing other stuff. Not necessarily the courts, but just, it's why you have to be vigilant in watching them. It's why you can't just watch sports and kittens.
It's also why you can't just come home and plug into CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and pay attention to what Trump tweeted today. Because most of what you see on those channels don't affect you. The guy from Empire, whatever his name is, doesn't affect me on this level. It just doesn't. It's an interesting case, and it's one of those things that catches everybody's eye. But what happens here, the laws that are passed here, the court cases that apply to possibly to me, my neighbors, and my family, that really makes a difference. Let's say all politics is local.
Absolutely.
Soapbox Dave.
Soapbox. So basically, we started this podcast, or ended this podcast right where we started it.
Everybody sucks.
Yes, and pay attention, but not too much.
Yeah, I mean, turn off American Idol every once in a while.
Yes, please.
Closing thoughts, Jessica.
Well, it's to continue what we were talking about. I read this article this week that was about toast, and it was about how it's unhealthy to like blacken or burn your toast, and how toast is best served golden brown. And the headline caught my attention. I have no idea why, but it was about toast, obviously. And I read the entire article. It was like 6 paragraphs. And when I got to the bottom, I was like, man, I wish my job was to write about toast. Like, I would talk about butter and jelly and all these wonderful things you could put on toast. And there are people out there getting paid to write about toast. And here I am beating my head into the wall trying to change people's minds and encourage them to be involved and hold their elected officials accountable. And someone out there is writing about the health benefits of the temperature of toast and getting paid to do it.
I could compare some of our lawmakers to toast.
On next week's episode.
Boring. Dry. You know what? There's somebody sending that writer hate mail about how dumb he is for misrepresenting burnt toast.
Well, the first thought I had was, does anyone try to burn toast? I mean, why would you assume that people shouldn't be eating toast that way? Like, it's usually an accident when that happens.
I don't know. I've gotten some burnt toast from some room service that I wonder, like, did you not look at this before you sent it up here? Yeah. Like, in my house, if toast gets burnt, I just throw it away.
You don't have to serve it.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's 20 cents.
Or you could just say we ran out. Like,
yeah.
Not serve a crap product, but... So anyway.
Matt, closing thoughts?
Public land.
Public lands.
Public land.
We haven't kicked and punched at him too much for not making it. You know, following up what I said, I'm sorry if I cut you off on the toast thing.
Mm-mm.
I really thought when I saw it on your show notes that it was an abbreviation for something. It was an acronym. No, just gonna talk about toast.
Honest, straight to goodness. Toast, American toast.
Well, if you ever get the cookbook away from your dog, you find the right way to make toast.
Right.
Get involved locally. That meeting I was in, the governmental affairs with the Chamber of Commerce, there were 3 business owners in there. 3. This is the Chamber of Commerce. Everybody else was either part of a large corporation, which, you know, the hospital in town talked about certificate of need. You know, not that that's self-serving or anything. But all these folks want to hear from you. They say they want to hear from you. They, especially on the local level, your county commissioners, your city officials, your mayor, they all make decisions on the people who are the loudest. And they're usually the a-holes. Like me, I was there. So if that's the only feedback they're getting, they're not getting feedback from good folks, you know, especially the limited government folks, they think it's perfectly fine to pass garbage legislation, that's what the people want. So
I totally agree. They need to know when the community thinks they're off base, because they don't want to be hated by everyone. A few people doesn't bother them, but the idea of getting unelected is not something they want to hear about. And if they think that that's an issue that's going to drive that, they may vote differently.
The last thing they want to do is to be sent home.
Put the fear of God in them.
So, on that note, for Jessica Szilagyi, the absent Matt Lowe, I'm Dave Roberts. Have a good week.